The first letter showed up in my mailbox on a Tuesday. I remember because it was trash day and I almost tossed it without opening. Looked like one of those fake urgent notice scams. But this one was different. It had a gold seal, a typed letterhead that reads Cypress Ridge HOA, and my full name across the top. Problem was, Cypress Ridge didn't have an HOA. I'd specifically bought my house here 6 years ago because it was one of the few neighborhoods in town without one. No random fines over mailbox colors. No one measuring my grass with a ruler. I unfolded the paper and read, "Dear Mr. Victor Penley, this is your second notice for unpaid association dues in the amount of $475. Failure to remit payment within 10 days will result in additional penalties. Second notice, I don't get rattled easily, but this ticked me off. I walked straight over to my neighbor Clint's house, 2 doors down. He's been living here for 20 years and runs a small landscaping business out of his garage. Hey Clint, I said, waving the letter. You ever hear of a Cypress Ridge HOA? He squinted at the paper. What the hell is this? There ain't no HOA here, never has been. Somebody's playing games. Turns out I wasn't the only one who got the letter. By the end of the week, 7 of us had received identical notices, same formatting, same demand for $475, same 10-day threat. The name at the bottom, Beverly Raskin. Now, Beverly had moved into the neighborhood about 8 months ago. Mid-50s, always wearing a visor, always walking around with a clipboard like she was running a summer camp for adults. I'd caught her snapping photos of people's yards and muttering about property values, but none of us had ever voted her into anything. There wasn't even a vote. On Saturday morning, I found her standing in front of my mailbox, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Mr. Penley," she called with that fake bright voice. "Just a reminder, dues are considered late after Monday." I stepped onto my porch. "We don't have an HOA, Beverly. You can't just make one up and start charging people." She narrowed her eyes like I'd just insulted her casserole. "Actually, we do. It was reactivated by a quiet vote last fall. I was elected president unanimously." "Funny how no one remembers voting," she bristled. "Maybe you should have read the notices I sent in September. This is a legally recognized homeowners association. I've already registered it through the county." She turned on her heel and marched off down the sidewalk. I spent the rest of the day digging through property records. Took trips to the county office, spoke with a clerk named Jenna who pulled up everything she could find. There was no record of any HOA reinstatement. Nothing filed. Nothing legitimate, but Beverly had forged a document claiming otherwise, and she'd sent those dues notices to over 20 residents. That's when I realized this wasn't just some overzealous neighborhood mom with a power trip. This was fraud, real, prosecutable fraud. And I was going to prove it. By Sunday morning, I had printed every document I pulled from the county database, highlighted inconsistencies, and filed them neatly into a binder. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was prepared. If Beverly thought she could shake down working-class families with forged paperwork and phony authority, she'd picked the wrong neighborhood and the wrong guy. That afternoon, I visited a retired attorney named Mrs. Givens who lived across from the community garden. She'd practiced real estate law for 3 decades before retiring, and everyone respected her partly because she knew her stuff, and partly because she had no patience for nonsense. She shuffled through the binder slowly, adjusting her glasses. "This isn't just some nuisance tactic," she said finally. "She used a fraudulent signature to create an entity that doesn't exist, then attempted to collect money from the public. That's criminal fraud. Possibly mail fraud too, depending on how she sent the letters." "She hand-delivered mine," I said. "Still counts," she replied. "It's the intent that matters." I asked her if she'd be willing to help me file a formal complaint. She agreed but warned me to document everything thoroughly. "If she's bold enough to fake filings, she's bold enough to lie under oath. You'll need more than just county records." Over the next 2 days, I installed a small camera above my front door, angled discreetly toward the street. I wasn't trying to catch her doing anything illegal, I just wanted evidence of her behavior in case she escalated. Meanwhile, Clint and a few other neighbors started comparing their notices. We noticed each one had different dates, and none of them matched the timeline Beverly claimed in her vote documents. She was sloppy. Then came Wednesday. Around 10 in the morning, I stepped outside to water the ferns on my porch and saw Beverly walking briskly toward the Martinez house across the street. She knocked without waiting and immediately began gesturing with that same clipboard. I couldn't hear every word, but enough carried over. "You're required to remove the flag," she was saying. "It violates the Uniform Appearance Clause." Mr. Martinez, an Air Force veteran, looked stunned. "What clause? That's my service flag. It's not about patriotism," she said. "It's about consistency." He shook his head and went back inside without another word. She stood there for a moment, then made a note and marched off toward the next house. That was it. I called a contact I knew at the City Compliance Office, Marcus, a former coworker from my days as a paralegal. I gave him the highlights and asked if he had time to look over something urgent. He agreed to meet the following morning. We sat in a downtown cafe, away from the neighborhood. I handed him the binder, along with a flash drive containing video snippets and scanned letters. He whistled low when he got to the fake minutes from the community vote. "She didn't even bother using real names for half of these signatories," he said. "This one here, Beatrice Langford, I went to high school with her and she's been dead for 6 years. He closed the binder. "You've got enough to trigger an investigation, especially if she's collected money already. She's been pressuring people. One guy gave her cash just to shut her up. She wrote him a receipt on notebook paper." Marcus nodded gravely. "I'll file a report with the state's Real Estate Regulatory Board and loop in a contact at the DA's office. If she's impersonating a legal entity and collecting payments under false pretenses, that's criminal." That evening, I gathered a group of 12 neighbors in my backyard. We sat in a loose circle, some of us holding coffee or soda, others just pacing. No one had ever called a formal meeting before, but this felt necessary. "She's targeting people one at a time," said Rosa, a teacher with 2 kids. "I didn't know anyone else was getting letters until you knocked on my door. She told me I'd lose access to the community amenities," said James, an Uber driver who lived in the duplex down the street. "What amenities?" "We don't even have a pool. She left me a notice warning about my garden gnome," said Mrs. Givens. "Claimed it was a violation of the design code." People chuckled at that, but the mood was tense. I stood up and shared what Marcus had told me. I also told them I was filing a formal police report the next morning and encouraged anyone who'd been contacted by Beverly to do the same. "If we all file similar reports," I said, "they can't chalk it up to a neighborhood dispute. They'll have to investigate." The next morning, I walked into the precinct with a folder of documents, my flash drive, and a written summary of events. The officer at the desk listened patiently, then called in a detective from White Collar Crimes. Detective Rivas was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, and all business. He took one look at the forged HOA articles and raised an eyebrow. "She's collecting dues under a name she doesn't have the right to use." "Exactly." "She claimed a dormant HOA had been reactivated, but there's no legal process to back it up." He asked me to stick around while he made a few calls. After about 30 minutes, he returned with a printout and a smirk of disbelief. "She submitted paperwork to the Secretary of State's office last month. It was rejected due to missing signatures, but she's been using a copy of the draft form as if it were official, meaning she faked it, then tried to pass it off as real." He handed me back my binder. "We'll open a case, and you might want to tell your neighbors to stop engaging with her directly." "Let us handle it." That weekend, Beverly showed up at the Reynolds house, trying to collect late fees. She must not have known the police had spoken to the county registrar that morning and confirmed that no HOA had been active here since 1997. 2 squad cars rolled up just before noon. I didn't see the moment they placed her in handcuffs, wasn't about to stand around gawking, but I did see the look on her face as they led her to the cruiser. She looked stunned, like someone had ripped the script out of her hands. Her clipboard was tucked under an officer's arm, and her phone was sealed in an evidence bag. Detective Rivas called me later that evening. She's facing a felony count of attempted fraud, plus violations for misrepresentation and impersonating a public officer. Turns out she's done this before in another county, but the case never went to court. Why not? Lack of evidence. But this time, thanks to your documentation, we've got her cold. I hung up and stepped outside. The air smelled like fresh cut grass, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like the neighborhood could breathe again. The next day, Clint stapled a flyer to the community board. No HOA, no dues, no dictators. People left handwritten notes under it, some funny, some just relieved. No one mentioned Beverly again after that, but the flag Mr. Martinez had put up. It stayed right where it was. The Monday after Beverly was taken in, the neighborhood was quiet in that eerie way that follows a storm. No one was mowing lawns or trimming hedges. Even the kids who usually raced their bikes down the sidewalk were nowhere to be seen. It felt like everyone was waiting to see if the whole thing had really happened, or if she'd show up again with another clipboard and a new excuse. I spent the morning organizing all the digital files. I had videos, scanned letters, timelines, and contact logs. I knew the legal system didn't move quickly, and I wasn't about to let this thing get swept under a rug. If she'd gotten away with this in another county, she might try to slide through again. Not this time. Around noon, I got a call from the assistant district attorney, a woman named Erin Haverson. Her voice was sharp, matter-of-fact, but not unfriendly. "I'm overseeing the case against Beverly Raskin," she said. "Detective Rivas gave me your file very thorough. I'd like to ask you a few clarifying questions." She asked about the dates of the letters, how many residents had come forward, and whether anyone had actually paid her. I gave her James's name, and Erin said she'd already contacted him. Then she paused. "We also found something else in her home during the warrant execution," she said. "A ledger, handwritten. It lists over 30 names, including yours, with notes about potential penalties, planned fines, and a schedule for escalating collections. She had a whole structure mapped out." "She planned to bleed us a little at a time," I said. "Looks that way, but it gets worse." There's a line item in the back titled Property Recovery Strategy. It outlines a process for placing liens on properties in the event of non-payment. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I could feel the hair on my arms start to rise. "She couldn't do that legally," I said finally. "No, but she had drafted fake lien notices. It appears she was preparing to deliver them next month under the pretense of overdue fees. If she had succeeded, some residents might have tried to pay out of fear without ever contacting legal counsel." I exhaled slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Testimony, eventually, and continued documentation. We're pursuing charges beyond fraud now. Attempted extortion and intent to falsify legal claims. Possibly obstruction too, depending on how she responds during deposition." I agreed and hung up. I didn't sit down. I couldn't. I paced my living room, trying to shake the realization that she'd mapped out a full campaign against people who just wanted to live in peace. By Wednesday, news had reached the local paper. They ran a small column buried on page 3, but someone from Channel 8 must have seen it because by Friday, a news van had parked near the cul-de-sac. A reporter in a navy blazer knocked on my door, microphone in hand, cameraman behind her. "Are you Victor Penley?" she asked. "You were one of the first residents to report the fake HOA activity." I wasn't thrilled about talking on camera, but I figured sunlight was the best disinfectant. We stood under the shade of my front porch while she asked questions about the fake dues, the documents, and the forged vote. "She made it look official," I told her. "She had seals, formatting, fake meeting minutes. If you weren't paying attention or if you were older and didn't know what to look for, you might have believed her." They aired the segment that night. It was short, but effective. They showed clips of the binder-eyed assembled, blurred-out names, and closed with a shot of Beverly being escorted into the courthouse in handcuffs. The next day, the neighborhood felt entirely different. People were outside again. Mr. Martinez was barbecuing, Rosa's kids were drawing chalk dinosaurs on the sidewalk, and for the first time in weeks, the conversations were casual again, not whispered behind closed doors. That afternoon, I got a visit from someone I hadn't expected. Charles Wynn, the owner of a real estate firm a few blocks over. Tall silver hair, blazer too crisp for the heat. "I heard about what happened," he said, shaking my hand. "You did the right thing. And not just for the neighborhood, this kind of behavior poisons property values across the board." I raised an eyebrow. "You sell homes. You're not worried about stirring the pot," he shook his head. "You expose one fraud, you protect 10 honest deals." I've seen too many cases where someone like her gets away with it because no one wants to make noise. You made some noise. He handed me a business card, not for anything official, just in case I ever needed a contact in city zoning. Beverly's scheme crossed several lines. I wouldn't be surprised if the State Housing Board opens a secondary investigation. He was right. The following week, I received a letter from the state's Department of Consumer Protection. They'd opened a parallel inquiry into unauthorized real estate practices and fraudulent collection attempts. Apparently, Beverly had applied for a property manager's license 3 months earlier and been denied. But she'd acted as if she had it anyway. Now that crossed into a whole new territory. Operating without a license and misrepresenting authority under state housing law. The penalties for that weren't small. Up to 5 years and a permanent ban from working in any real estate-related role. Erin Haverson called again the next day. "She's retained counsel," she said, "and they're pushing for a plea deal. But we're not interested in a slap on the wrist." "Good," I said. "She's claiming she believed the HOA had been legally reactivated, that she misunderstood the process." "She drafted fake minutes and used names of deceased residents," I said. "That's not misunderstanding. That's a blueprint." Erin agreed. She also told me they'd found email correspondence on Beverly's laptop with a woman in another city, someone who'd tried a similar scam and avoided charges. They'd been swapping templates. "She didn't stumble into this," Erin said. "She studied it." I relayed the update to Clint and Rosa later that evening. We were standing near the corner where Beverly used to pace with her clipboard. "She had a whole network," Rosa muttered. "Like a black market for fake HOAs." Clint nodded slowly. "Makes you wonder how many more are out there." We didn't have an answer for that, but we did have a plan. A week later, we brought together 15 residents and formed a neighborhood committee, not an HOA, just a watchdog group. We called it the Cypress Ridge Council. Our only goal was transparency. We met once a month, shared updates, and made sure everyone knew their rights and responsibilities. We wrote a 1-page flyer with contact info for local legal aid, the city zoning office, and the State Housing Board. We delivered a copy to every house on the block. The day Beverly's trial was scheduled, I wore the only suit I had. Erin had asked me to testify during the preliminary hearing, and I did. Calmly, clearly, and with every shred of evidence I'd collected. Her lawyer tried to discredit me, suggested I had a vendetta or personal grudge. "You live in this neighborhood," the lawyer said, "so you benefited from the removal of someone who, arguably, was trying to maintain order." Erin stood and responded before I could. "Mr. Penley didn't benefit," she said. "He prevented a criminal scheme that would have defrauded dozens of residents and potentially cost them their homes. The only order Beverly Raskin was trying to maintain was one that gave her control." The judge nodded slowly. "Motion to proceed to trial is granted. Bail is revoked." They led Beverly out of the courtroom. She didn't look at me. Her expression wasn't shocked anymore, just exhausted. Outside, the air felt clearer. Back home, I found the council was already planning our next community night. Clint had built a projection screen out of plywood and a sheet. Rosa was organizing a potluck. The kids were drawing up signs. No rules, no fines, no clipboards, just neighbors. And a neighborhood that remembered what it meant to stand together. 2 weeks after the hearing, a formal court date was set for early June. The prosecutor's office had compiled enough to push for a full trial, and Beverly's legal team was struggling to keep up. From what Erin told me, their strategy had shifted from denial to damage control. They no longer claimed she had misunderstood the rules. Now they were trying to argue that she had acted without malicious intent. That was a hard sell. Erin requested that I attend a pre-trial meeting at the courthouse. She wanted to go over my witness statement again, this time with the state investigator who had joined the case after the ledger and forged lien notices were discovered. His name was Darren McKee, a soft-spoken man with a short beard and a quiet intensity that made every word feel deliberate. He'd been with the state's Consumer Fraud Division for over 15 years. As I sat across from him in the conference room, he flipped through a thick folder with yellow tabs sticking out at odd angles. "You might find this interesting," Darren said, sliding a photocopy across the table. This is the application she submitted last month to the county tax assessor's office. She attempted to register herself as the authorized representative for 7 properties in your neighborhood, yours included. I stared at the form. My address was there, typed neatly, with a signature at the bottom that was definitely not mine. She was trying to gain access to tax records, Darren continued. Possibly to issue fraudulent lien claims, or to intercept delinquency notices and pretend they were part of her HOA enforcement authority. We've seen this tactic in a few property scam cases upstate. And the county didn't verify any of this. They flagged it for inconsistency and denied the request. That's what triggered the referral to our office. Turns out this wasn't her first attempt to impersonate a neighborhood administrator. We've opened a case file on 2 similar reports from other counties, same name, same tactics, different neighborhoods. I leaned back in my chair. So she's been doing this longer than we thought. Darren nodded. At least 2 years based on the earliest document we've uncovered. She moves into older neighborhoods where HOAs have dissolved or never existed, then fabricates authority using doctored records and official-looking seals. She targets owners who are less likely to challenge her: retirees, single parents, new arrivals. I thought this was a one-off, I said quietly. Something small. It never is, Darren replied. People like her don't stop unless someone makes them. The trial began on a cloudy Thursday morning. The courtroom was larger than I expected, packed with long benches and buzzing with quiet whispers. Several of my neighbors showed up to support the case, including Rosa, Clint, and Mrs. Givens. They didn't carry signs or make a scene, just sat quietly in the back, watching. Beverly entered wearing a gray suit and a blank stare. Her lawyer trailed behind, clutching a stack of folders. She didn't glance toward the gallery, didn't acknowledge any of us. Her posture was rigid, like someone trying to pretend they weren't unraveling. During testimony, the prosecutor introduced the ledger from her home. Page after page of notes, including color-coded threats, target lists, and long-term compliance plans for individual residents. One entry read, Victor P. Likely to resist, monitor closely, escalate pressure if needed. Another said, Martinez patriotic, use flag violation as leverage. The courtroom fell silent at that. Erin called me up mid-morning. I took the stand and answered every question clearly, noting dates, names, and specific documents. When Beverly's lawyer tried to suggest I had interpreted her actions unfairly, Erin presented the fake tax form application with my forged signature. "Did you authorize Miss Raskin to act on your behalf?" she asked. "No. Did you sign this form?" "No. Do you know who did?" I turned toward the defense table. "She did." Beverly shifted slightly in her seat. Her hands clenched the table edge, knuckles pale. Later, James testified about the cash payment he'd made under pressure. He described how she'd shown up uninvited, warned him that non-payment could result in a lien, and handed him a notebook paper receipt scribbled with HOA fee paid. She told me if I didn't pay, it might hurt my credit score, James said. I didn't know what was real or not. I just didn't want trouble. Then came the bombshell. Darren McKee took the stand and explained how the Consumer Fraud Division had traced Beverly's activities across 3 counties. He presented a 3-page summary of her past attempts to create fake HOAs, including one instance where she almost succeeded in placing a lien on a deceased man's home before the family caught it and intervened. But this is the first time she's been prosecuted, Aaron said. Yes, Darren confirmed. Because this time, the evidence was overwhelming. Thanks to Mr. Penley's documentation, we were able to tie the fraudulent claims directly to her actions, including possession of forged documents, unauthorized applications, and a pattern of targeted deception. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: fraud, attempted extortion, impersonation of a public officer, and unauthorized access to private records. The judge ordered immediate remand, noting that Beverly had clearly demonstrated a pattern of calculated abuse and posed an ongoing risk to the public. As she was led out of the courtroom, her mask finally cracked. She didn't cry or plead, just stared ahead, as if none of it had ever been real. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, 5 years in state prison, with an additional 3 years of probation. The judge also issued a permanent injunction barring her from serving in any administrative or fiduciary role related to property management or neighborhood associations. Any attempt to do so would result in immediate incarceration. That evening, the neighborhood council met under the string lights in Clint's backyard. No speeches, no grand declarations, just people sharing lemonade and grilled chicken, watching their kids chase fireflies. The sense of tension that had hovered for months had finally lifted. Mrs. Givens handed me a manila envelope as I was helping clear plates. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled, something softer than usual. "The state's Consumer Fraud Division sent it to me. Said it belonged to you." Inside was a certificate of recognition, signed by Darren McKee and the state commissioner. It read, "In recognition of outstanding civic action and community protection." I folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "I didn't do it for recognition." "Of course not," she said. "But it's still good to know that when someone tries to take advantage of quiet neighborhoods like ours, somebody's willing to raise their voice." Across the yard, Clint was helping a group of kids build a birdhouse. Rosa was laughing as her youngest tried to eat a marshmallow that hadn't finished cooling. The sound of hammers tapping and kids shouting over each other filled the air. No one mentioned Beverly. No one needed to. We'd seen what could happen when power is faked, when fear is used to control, when someone tries to bend a community into submission with nothing more than paper and threats. But we'd also seen what happens when people push back, when they pull together, compare notes, speak up, and refuse to be bullied. Not every victory makes the news. Not every hero wears a badge or a robe or a suit. Sometimes all it takes is a clipboard, a mailbox, and a neighbor who says, "Not here."